Now, if you've been following along, you'll know that I've got my props. I have recently replaced, or still in the process effectively, replacing my very, very trusty and reliable, and in fact, fantastic in every way, Apple MacBook Air, which is an M2 variety. I've had an M1 variety also. This is an M2 variety with a new entry into the household, which is the M4 version. And there's a previous video about the unpacking, and there's also another video about the wrapping of this laptop. So I wanted to go over how it's done in the Apple world, because most people in the Windows world don't realize, quotes, what they're missing. I do say this as I would say, a Windows fanboy for decades. But just like Steve Jobs used to say, once said, that he'd always had a machine in the basement running an Intel version of macOS, I can say that for decades we've had in our household an Apple system which we would compare against all Windows systems. And even so, even having been an Apple owner for all those decades minorly, I never realized how convenient the movement between Apple machines was. So that's what I'm going to document today, because it's something that Windows users, again, just don't know about. So that's the plan. I've got a little article here, and I wanted to just go through what I've written and tell you it in better detail. So when you buy an Apple laptop, you get macOS installed on that laptop. But when you power it on these days, you do need an internet connection. Now, Apple systems don't tend to have an Ethernet port, so what they really mean is a Wi-Fi connection to get to the internet. Although you probably presumably can plug in a USB to Ethernet dongle. So what happens is you power the laptop on, you select your language, and then it's going to ask you for a Wi-Fi connection. There is a slight exception to that if you haven't previously erased the laptop. We'll cover that later. In the Apple world, which is something that Microsoft has been wanting to do for a long time, there's something called an Apple ID, which is an ID that is your gateway to all your Apple services. So you have an Apple ID and a password. And if you have a laptop that's shared by more than one person, each person will have their own Apple ID. How do you get the Apple ID? Well, you can get the Apple ID by logging into a web page and getting it that way, or what a lot of people do, and I think erroneously, is they use their email ID. So you can create an Apple ID, which is something at iCloud.com, but what most people, I would say, mistakenly do is they create, for example, they have a Gmail ID, so they've got fred@gmail.com, and that becomes their Apple ID. That's the username at the Apple headquarters. So I have seen it where you can buy a laptop whereby you just get a laptop, you power it up, and I'm fault finding someone's laptop, and I go to the settings page and I look for the Apple ID, and believe it or not, there's no Apple ID, and that is something really weird. When you get an Apple laptop, if it's been properly recycled, the laptop will be detached from the Apple ID, and you will get a laptop without an Apple ID. And then what happens is that via the internet connection at first boot, you have to activate that laptop, and that assigns your hardware to your Apple ID. And this is a very powerful feature, and one, again, that Microsoft has been wanting to do for ages. There's been so much kickback because in the olden days, Microsoft laptops just had a local user ID and password, and that was just stored on your own laptop. And therefore, if your laptop got stolen, there was no easy way of resetting that. But if you have a Microsoft ID on your your Windows laptop, then of course, if you lock yourself out, there's a way of recovering that. So that's just one example of why the Microsoft and the Apple ID is a great idea. So when you have an Apple laptop, you need an Apple ID and password, and then you need a separate user ID and password. Okay. But the key thing is to know that if you buy an Apple laptop and it just boots up and someone's created a user ID for you and you don't have an Apple ID, in my opinion, that's a really dodgy configuration. I would not want to buy a laptop like that. Okay, so let's talk about migration. So you've bought a new laptop, you've created your Apple ID, it boots up, and then you just install your apps. That's the regular way. But if you've got an old Apple system, as most Apple users have, there's a much better way. Now, again, Windows users perhaps will not know this, because with a Windows system, how do you get from an old Windows installation to a new installation? For a Windows user, when you buy a new laptop, you boot the laptops up. Microsoft would like you to create a Microsoft ID. I think that is a good idea for reasons of the theft, as I was saying, and the reset. And then you install your apps, and then you, again, on your new laptop, and then you copy over from your old laptop to the new laptop your data. So you might put it onto a USB stick. I have a very fast USB stick, which is a 500 megabyte per second USB stick, so I can copy gigabytes of information in literally seconds over to the new laptop. So that's how I would typically do it. But in the Mac world, it's completely different. So this is what we're going to focus in on, and this is why, if you're a Windows user, I want you to please listen to what I'm saying and understand how convenient it is, because this laptop here has all my apps on it, all my data on it, all my configuration on it, and it only took less than an hour. I actually went off, I set it going and I went off cycling and I came back and it had completely finished. That's how easy it was. There's no interaction whatsoever. So for an Apple system, you've either previously made a time machine backup, and that's a free system with every Apple computer. So if you have an external hard disk or external SSD or key, you can make a full systems backup of your laptop to that key or that external disk, and that's called a time machine backup. And when you're trying to migrate from your existing laptop to the new system, you get to a point where it says, have you got a backup of your system? Or do you have your old or your existing computer that you want to migrate from? And you say yes. So either you restore from that backup, which can be quite involved or more involved if you've got more than one computer backing up to that external drive, as I found out when I did a test yesterday. Or, and this is the fastest way for Apple M series laptops, you connect a Thunderbolt cable between the laptops. So from one USB-C port, you connect a cable. I've got a prop. So it doesn't come with a laptop, unfortunately. Of course, it doesn't come with a laptop. This is Apple. You buy an expensive Thunderbolt cable. This is something like a £50 cable. It's just a 1 meter long. And you connect it between the laptops. And then the migration program knows that, and it will give you a speed. And the speed it told me that I was copying between the laptops, so the link speed is 2,000 megabytes per second. And that's why the whole system, hundreds of gigabytes, got copied in less than an hour. If your machine was previously erased, that was how it would normally work. There is a special case whereby if I have erased a laptop and I've given it to you, then effectively macOS is not installed. And in that case, what happens is when you switch, if I sell this laptop to you, I've properly erased it using the settings option, erase all information from the Apple laptop. Then when you get to the migration step, it says, oh, wait a minute, I need to install macOS first. So then it effectively has to download quite a few gigabytes from the interweb, which is macOS, install macOS, reboot, and then it comes to this migration step again. So that's the only other case that I can think of. And there you have it. So what are the learning points? What did I say? Yeah, this is absolutely not what happens in a Windows system. For a Windows system, you need to perform the installation or finish the first boot and first installation. You need to manually put the data onto a USB key, for example, and copy it over. and then you are in charge of installing all your old apps, not Microsoft. And so it just works. It's a bit of a cliche statement, but I have moved it, and I've done this several times. I've even done it as a test. We migrated my partner's laptop to this machine to machine. I made a time machine backup, so I did a restore or from the old laptop onto this as a test, and then finally, when I was happy, I just did a straight migration, and all that was a very swift process. So there we have it. Apple migration is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and if you're a Windows user, you should know about it and ask yourself, why doesn't Microsoft provide such a facility? Thanks for watching.